2, 3, we're good to go.
Mr. President?
How's your foot?
Much better. You saved me.
Did it come, I mean, it took a 2-3 months and it's getting.
It took three treatments, and yeah,
But you're walking better and stuff.
totally better.
I kind of figured it.
Except if I take out the orthotic, it'll revert back. In other words, now I am.
Yeah, I can't wear without
But
it.
it really helped.
I mean, that makes me. I was wondering about. I wanted to ask you, but
No,
good.
it
Thank
really
you.
helped. Good. Hey.
Hi, Happy New Year. Good to see you. Oh, I thought you were singing. Is Arcos here?
Morning. Whoops. I thought somebody was going to get me a gavel for Christmas. Morning. Happy New Year. Today is Tuesday, January 8th. It's our first meeting of 2019. This is a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Let's start the meeting with something I think we all can hope for right away, and that is that the students of Los Angeles have schools to go to that stay open, and that have teachers to go to that stay open. And from a community policing perspective, there's no place better for kids than to be at schools. And if the adults would all act like adults instead of like kids, then maybe the kids would have a place to go to school. And the idea that we wait 2 days and then have one meeting, and wait 2 days and have another meeting, everybody should be locked in a room. And these schools need not to close from our perspective. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioner Sobroff, Decker, Bonner, Figueroa Villa, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Great. Okay, let's start with the consent agenda items. We have comments on G, K, L, and M. So I'm going to make a motion to approve items 1A, B, C, D, E, F, H, I, and J. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to the comment card on number
G.
G.
Okay, we have Michael Novick.
Michael Novick. Good morning, sir.
The United Teachers Los Angeles retired offender comments outrageous. The district could easily resolve this by reducing class size and meeting the other community
Everybody
demands.
thinks the other side's wrong. But who
Okay,
gets hurt?
so item G.
Okay, go ahead.
Item G is a donation of $5,000 from the Los Angeles Police Foundation. I'm glad that Mr. Bonner asked for an audit of all of last year's donations. Today alone, you have over $45,000 being donated to the LAPD. I think you need to reject these donations, this one in particular from the Police Foundation, which represents a conflict of interest because of your involvement with funding that foundation, Mr. Soboroff. And I don't think that the leadership is excellent, so I don't think it should be a grant for excellence in leadership for a holiday party. I don't think it's a necessity. I think that the money would be much better spent on other community needs. I think you should urge the Police Foundation either to disband or to give us money for housing, health care, education, job training, and other community needs instead of for celebrations at the LAPD. In particular in the harbor area where you're starting to find more and more homeless people, and the LAPD is not dealing with it properly.
We have no other comment cards on this item.
We have a motion for approval on 1K,
1G, sir.
1G, I'm sorry. Second, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay. Let's go to 1K. We have one speaker.
We have two speakers for one K.
Speakers on K?
We have Michael Novick and T. Guerra.
Mr. Novick?
Yeah, this is another $5,000 close to from the LA Police Foundation, and it's being used for expenses related to attending the National Defense Plan demonstration and counterterrorism symposium in Lyon, France. We've been seeing in France lately the impact and result of austerity and the kinds of measures that are also being carried out here in Los Angeles, where people are in the streets rebelling in yellow vests, and the police, apparently some of them are joining in. I think that a counterterrorism symposium is completely inappropriate for the LAPD to be involved in. I think that you're not a counterterrorism agency. Your Special Operations Bureau on Counterterrorism represents a militarization of the police, and I think you should reject this money. I think that Zarconi should not have gone, but if he went, he should pay his own way.
Thank you.
T. Guerra.
So I have comrades who have long been engaged in the fight against state-funded counter-terrorist programs that are really just masks for nationalism and hate. And in speaking to them about this agenda item today, there were a few things that struck me. One is that even they had trouble finding out about the nature of these conferences. So what that tells me is, what hope do any of you have when you clearly do not review any of these items, and the LAPD consistently lies to you about the very nature of their programs? The second thing that struck me was, in speaking to them about how they could not attend, this was a reminder of how this whole commission and these meetings are set up in such a way that tells us you all aren't supposed to understand the things that you're voting on. You're not supposed to have time to review them. You're not supposed to have time to seek out the opinions of folks in communities that are most impacted and to hear their point of view, folks who are fighting these battles every day and who have families that are impacted by these programs. You're not supposed to have time. It is specifically designed in that way. It's designed to be inaccessible, and that is something that every one of you should be concerned about. And for my comrades who are unable to attend this meeting today, I stand with every one of them in saying that you should reject the funding on this item.
Thank you.
There are no other comment cards on this item.
We have a motion?
1K.
Motion for approval? I'll move it. We have a second? All in favor? Aye. Item 1L.
1L, we have one comment card. We have T. Guerra.
So again, I'm here to demand that we cease the funding of these programs, training events, and symposiums that use claims of national security as justification to implement programs that profile and target people of color. These programs and trainings represent the ultimate exchange of the worst practices in oppressive policing tactics and policies of state violence, including extrajudicial executions, shoot-to-kill policies, racial profiling, massive spying and surveillance, deportation and detention, and attacks on protesters and dissenters. Here in LA, the LAPD's Counterterrorism Task Force is responsible for profiling people of color and for engaging in field stops of black folks specifically at a rate that far exceeds stops of any other rate. Of all of LAPD's task forces, this is the group that engages in racial profiling at the highest level. Yet when we look at who is ultimately a threat to the community here in Los Angeles and that harm continues to be done by, it is by white people in power. And the tools used by this white-centered community are the LAPD and the Los Angeles Police Foundation, who uses literally millions of dollars to discriminately fund policing programs that they would like to see implemented, and that inevitably results in the continued surveillance, stalking, containment, and displacement of communities and individuals of color. If we examine the plans of Victoria Police that hosted this counterterrorism forum, we see programs that are equivalent to the U.S.'s Countering Violent Extremism program, that organizations all across Los Angeles have outright rejected on the basis that it is deeply racist and fundamentally makes communities less safe, not more. Victoria Police also have plans to build a fusion center and to develop state-driven risk assessments to determine who they think is a threat. These are all tactics that are fundamentally biased and, again, do not result in communities being more safe. reject this funding of the Counterterrorism Task Force.
Thank you.
And we have no other cards on L?
Okay. We have a
On
motion.
K, I'm sorry? I'm sorry, L.
This is L, yeah. A motion for approval on item number 1L, please. Okay, second. All in favor? Aye. We're on item number 1M.
And we have 3 common cards. We have Michael Novick, Audrey George, and Adam Smith.
Yeah, I wanted to draw out the connection between items K and L and item M. This is a grant of $10,000 from the Police Foundation, again, to be used for community meetings to meet the chief's goal of deepening partnerships with the city's diverse neighborhoods for the benefit of the community relations section. And as I've pointed out previously, but I think there are some new members of the board, the writing in Police Chief Magazine and other law enforcement journals describes community-oriented policing as the domestic equivalent of psychological operations in the military. It's an effort to control the thinking of the enemy and the population. And I think the idea that community relations is the answer to the problems of policing in Los Angeles is seriously misguided, because it actually works hand in hand with so-called counterterrorism to define the people in Los Angeles as either a population to be controlled, whose thinking should be controlled, or as the enemy. And I think that it's inappropriate. I think this money should be rejected. I think that the counterterrorism and the counterinsurgency type of policing that is carried out by the LAPD represents a militarization of police, including through so-called community relations, and that it's inappropriate, and that the counterterrorism and the community relations are both aimed at stigmatizing segments of the population, perceiving them as a threat and an enemy, and it's used as a basis for the suspicious activity reports and for the predictive policing, which are attempts to criminalize a significant part of the population, particularly poor black and brown people, people of Muslim descent, and you should reject this money and reject the entire concept behind it.
Next speaker, please.
Audrey George.
Regarding item M, I can only assume that that money was really intended to meet the community's demands of having these meetings be held in the community and at times that are more accessible to the general public. You might remember that that's a demand we've been making for years, that obviously the time and dates of these meetings are intended to discourage the public from engaging with the police commission and the LAPD. But I'm confused because I'm sure that that's what that $10,000 must be intended for, but I don't understand why it's going to the LAPD instead of the commission or the city, whoever would fund whatever costs are involved in having community meetings. So, and in general, because the Police Foundation is no friend of the community and has obvious conflicts of interest, I do demand that any donation from the Police Foundation be rejected, and that there be an audit of these donations and to see how they are being spent to the detriment of our communities. Thank you.
Adam Smith.
Mr. Smith?
So I actually saw this $10,000 donation, Audrey, as something unrelated to the commission community meetings that happen either 6 or 4 times a year, depending on what Sobroff says. My question is, you know, all of these reports and consent agenda items have a link in the agenda each week, but the report doesn't say what the 10 grand is for. The request is coming from the chief. You know, you've talked about audits, Mr. Bonner. This is going to get approved like they always do, like you all will do. But, you know, shouldn't a random 10 grand that's going to community relations speak a little bit about what those relations are going to look like? What we're spending 10 grand on? The one word, the language in the report attached to the agenda says this is in an effort to meet Chief Moore's goal of deepening partnerships with the city's diverse neighborhoods and communities. Do you owe those diverse communities and goals of creating a relationship, do you owe them at least, what this 10 grand is going to be for in this report? And further, Chief Moore is not even here. Maybe we should at least push this item until next week when he is here.
We have no other comment cards on this item?
We have a motion for approval of item, Dale?
Yeah, so I did have a question, a similar question about not just the item in M, but also there was reference a number of times. I understand that there's a review underway as to the nature and amount of donations. I don't know if the city attorney will allow me to add to the scope of that request, but I'm interested in understanding a couple things. One is just, is there a policy one way or the other, as to how these donations emerge? Are they solicited, or are they, how do they emerge? That's one question I have generally. And then in those links to the reports themselves, there's the fairly standard, boilerplate language that asserts that there's essentially no favoritism or special treatment or something that goes along with them. And the question just also is what, if any, efforts we make over time to review to make sure that those representations are accurate, or true. So again, as from a process standpoint, my hope would be that the review that's underway would include at least those broad questions, and then more specifically relative to this, it would be helpful to understand what are some of the I'm supportive of the request, but it'd be helpful to understand just what are some of the discrete items that this, that these funds may cover. I don't know if anyone here has that information, or maybe we should put it over.
Chief Arcos, you want to talk about some of the community events?
Yeah, I can speak to what the chief has been doing since his inception as the chief of police.
Mr. Smith, can you stop speaking and interrupting the meeting?
Okay. So in coordination with the community relations section of the chief of police office, he's held a number of community forums throughout the city, and the forums have been in every place throughout the city, and it goes towards materials and funding of refreshments and beverages, I'm sure, as well, to help support these efforts. So I'm sure that the community relations section is using this money again towards those supplies and materials to help pull off these forums and the outreach that goes on in the communities.
Mr. Smith, this is your last warning, sir. You can speak during public comment just like anybody can, but you can't sit there and speak and disrupt the meeting. That was your last warning. Okay. Motion for approval of item number.
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So let's slow down for a second. So I was getting thank you for the input, but I was getting some input also from the city attorney as to, I think there's two questions here. One is I just want to make sure that I'm augmenting the prior request that the review include just the broader policy and a review, and that I assume that's appropriate. Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Richard, did you want to address?
I'll be happy to brief the chief's office about that. What they're doing now, the report was completed. The chief of police reviewed it. He had some questions. He kicked it back for further review. Hopefully it'll be on the agenda for next week. But with what you're adding now, I would recommend it come back probably in a couple weeks. What I would ask them to do is include the administrative code of the City of Los Angeles that allows for the acceptance of donations, and to expand on how the process works as to any donation, whether it's the Police Foundation or any other organization. They could include that in the report, and then have a summary of the donations that came forward.
Yeah, and to my understanding that some of these some, if not all of them, initiate at least with a grant application of some sort, depending upon the druthers of the donor. So it'd be helpful to understand on the front end when I'm asking if there's a policy. The question is presumably someone here fills out a grant application and submits it and asks for the donation. And the question is, what is the policy that says when that's appropriate, when it's not, and who, what controls are in place?
All the special orders will be attached to that report, which
Okay.
expands on everything you've asked about.
Appreciate it. Thank you. With that, Mr. President, I did understand, and I'm prepared to vote on at least this particular item with
Okay.
considering the response that was given by the chief.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so we make a motion for approval of 1M, please. Do we have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, let's go to item number 1A on the agenda item. I'm sorry, 2A. Yeah, we do have a couple of commission questions, so why don't we lead with those, and you guys can respond.
Very well. Good morning.
Commissioner Decker?
Good morning. Thank you very much for the report. I have, I think, some just basic preliminary questions to ensure that I understand the scope of the report, and particularly as a newer commissioner, I just want to be sure I understand the parameters. First, I should say, I recognize in footnote 3, you did indicate why you came up with the sample size and the calculation you used, and I certainly appreciate that given my prior questions. But with respect to this report, I want to be sure I understand that this is determining whether aggravated assaults or simple assaults under the FBI definition, whether the department has complied with the FBI definition. It has nothing to do with prosecutions. It has nothing to do with the state code. It is simply whether the department is reporting these statistics correctly under that definition, since that is what's reported to the federal government. Is that correct?
That is correct. Just for the record, Jeffrey Phillips, Commanding Officer of Audit Division. Yes, irrespective of how these crimes are classified according to UCR program, the attention that is given to investigating these crimes and filing for charges is based on department policy and the presentations that are made to the Office of the District Attorney.
Okay.
So yes, this is exclusively according to UCR.
Okay. And I did note on your audit plan for this next year, or this calendar year, you do also have this audit listed. Will the scope of the audit be the same, aggravated assaults and simple assaults, or will you expand that?
Yes, ma'am. We've kept it the same to compare apples with apples. We've been looking at crime classification going back since 2006. However, I like to say we slice and diced it a few different ways. And it really didn't allow us to make some comparisons. We did identify assaults being somewhat problematic at that time, and therefore there was an agreement to focus on assaults, aggravated assaults and simple assaults. We've been doing this since 2015. We started looking at 2014 assaults, and we've been able to make those comparisons. If I can share, when looking back at the first audit we conducted on assaults in 2015, which again looked at 2014 aggravated assaults and simple assaults, the current results are an improvement of 4% for the aggravated assaults. And simple assaults, there's an improvement of 6% compared to going back to that first audit and the current one at you see before you.
I appreciate that. That was going to be my next question, so thank you for anticipating that, as I didn't have the benefit of being on the commission to see that earlier report, and I wasn't able to find it. So I did have that question in terms of the overall changes since 2015. Those were all the questions that I had. If the other commissioners.
Just as a last note, I think that these things are attributable to what we refer to as the implementation of stronger internal controls in crime classification. CompStat Division conducts constant inspections, very akin to the audit that we do, but smaller samples. But they're constantly looking at these how crime is being classified, providing that feedback to Office of Operations. Office of Operations, in turn, will go ahead and make those changes. They'll provide the training. So there's been a lot of effort in really tightening up how crime is classified according to UCR.
And clarifying those definitions of each of the terms to be sure people really understand the distinction?
I think that, I believe it was CompStat in collaboration with Office of Operations. They did something, I think, pretty innovative. They created what they call a tree. And essentially, it's a diagram that will say, if it has this and this, then it's this, or it's that, and it kind of looks like a tree, so to speak. And I think that's been very helpful for folks within Office of Operations. The assaults, pretty challenging because officers go to the academy and they're taught according to the California Penal Code, and yet then they are expected to classify crime according to UCR, and you have some differences in those definitions. You know, the California Penal Code section doesn't differentiate aggravated from simple assaults. They have various assault penal code sections, but it's not broken down in simple, aggravated, and simple assault. So it caused some challenges, and that's, again, one of the other things that was implemented by the department in providing some detail and definition as to what, how it should be classified according to UCR.
Commander, I take it you have something you want to add?
Yes, ma'am. Commander Rodriguez from the Office of Operations. I just want to reiterate some of the systems and controls that Jeff Phillips was talking about. As you're all aware, several years ago, the department put together the Data Integrity Unit, which is the one that he was referencing about. And bi-weekly, they conduct reports of all the simple and aggravated assaults that happened the 2 week prior. From that audit that they do, we're able to take corrective actions immediately. If we see errors, we identify who the watch commanders are that misclassified that crime. If we have a pattern, and we also get a report from them as well, we provide that watch commander with the appropriate training so that they can identify the appropriate crime classification, a simple versus an aggravated assault. In addition to that, the Data Integrity Unit has put together a very simple decision-making tree. As you can see, the watch commanders sometimes are challenged in deciding which classification this crime should be. So if they follow that tree, generally, almost always, they'll get it correct. That has also been an addition that's been posted at every watch commander desk that they have at their disposal in order for them to get that right crime classification. In addition to that, our detectives are tasked with running weekly audits on all the reports that happen for that week. It's called a syntax report, which we use a keyword, for instance, gun or a weapon, and it'll pop up all the reports that happened during that period that had that weapon in it. So then we go back to make sure that that report was coded appropriately. So with all those efforts in mind, we're able to keep our classification as accurate as we possibly can. Obviously, we always miss one or two, but we have a very strong internal effort to try to minimize those as much as possible.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Just one question.
Commissioner?
Can either of you clarify for me you mentioned both the CompStat and the Data Integrity Unit. Can you just comment briefly on what's their relationship and respective roles? Are they overlapping, or are they working together, or what's their?
The Data Integrity Unit is a unit that is under the purview of CompStat Division.
Okay. All right.
So we have detectives specifically assigned to the Data Integrity Unit that it's all they do is they run reports, they check for accuracy of the crime classification coding, they identify who the watch commanders are or who the person responsible for signing that report was to ensure that there's no pattern, that there's not a lack of training or lack of understanding on their part, to make sure that they do have that little cheat sheet, the decision-making tree that I spoke about, that is at their disposal and that is being utilized in order to get the right crime classification. So it is a smaller unit that operates under the CompStat division. They work for the administrator, John Newman, and we do have constant communications with them as it relates to the crime classification and the crime coding as well.
Is that a full-time operation? I mean, so this unit,
yes, it
that's
is.
what they do all day, every day?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commander?
Hi, yeah, just one more point. with the respect of only looking at Jeffrey Phillips audits, only looking at aggravated assaults and assaults in general. A lot of us have gone to the FBI UCR training put on by the FBI, and the FBI has opined multiple times to us that the most difficult crime nationally to get right in uniform crime reporting is aggravated assaults. And if we miss it, we're calling something a simple assault, which is no longer a Part 1 crime, and it's not measured, then it's not captured. So that the danger, the risk is, we run the risk of underreporting our crime. That's what's so important about aggravated assaults. So in the last 3 years, since Dr. Phillips has been doing these audits and the data integrity unit, what we've seen is essentially the error rate has gotten better. We have a lot less errors in terms of categorizing crimes. But what's also important is that the rate of our errors. So if we classify something as an aggravated assault that's actually a simple versus classifying something as a simple versus an aggravated, it's actually equal now. So we're not missing it in one direction. We're not missing the aggravated assaults with any rate different than we miss the simple assaults. Does that make sense? So that was our big concern, and certainly was, in LA Times articles in I think 2014. Those are some of the concerns that the public had with it. So
Right. No, I understand, and having come from the federal system where this was an issue nationwide on
correct
departments having challenges categorizing that, I appreciate the challenge that you're trying to address.
Right.
So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Any other questions? Do we have any public comments on this item?
We have none, sir.
We have a motion for approval of item number 2. Did you turn in a card for 2A? Okay. Come on up. Okay.
This will be quick. I just wanted to reiterate what we've said before. And I think the LAPD is so lucky to have a DA that will never prosecute the murder of black and brown people that are shot and killed by cops. Because those crime statistics, those are crimes, and they are never going to be included in your reports.
Do we have a motion for approval of item number 2A? Do we have a second? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to 2B, risk management.
Jennifer, you look nice.
Let's begin with commission questions, or do you want to hear a little presentation, or why don't you start with questions?
If you're prepared with the presentation, that's fine. I'm happy to hear. I have somewhat two very distinct questions, though.
Let's go with the questions.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And
Sure.
then if there's anything you guys want to explain.
And Happy New Year, everyone. For the record, I'm Commander Jeff Burt, Risk Management Legal Affairs Group, and I'm with Captain Jennifer Thomas, Risk Management Division.
Thank you, both.
Terrific. Thank you both. First is regarding traffic collisions and the fact that there are 85 still pending investigation. Will we get a supplemental report indicating the status of that in the next quarter? Is that the plan?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Long answer to a simple problem. Our employee-involved traffic collisions take about 45 days at the minimum to complete. So we still have a couple from 2017 that aren't adjudicated, some complex ones. So there's a lag time in those. So when we're doing quarterly reports, it hasn't been. We're always playing catch up. So our numbers look artificially low, and so it's hard to say. So what we've changed starting this quarter, and we are looking at our traffic collisions at a fiscal rate, and we're reporting on them. We're going back 3 months. So hopefully we'll catch 95% of them to have a better rate, because otherwise every 3 months we're telling you stats that aren't. We're pulling our hair out too, because they're not as fresh as they can be.
Right.
So that will change, and you will get an updated number in the next report. And we've discussed that with Mr. Tfank as well.
Very good. My second question, I think, is more geared towards the city attorney than to both of you.
Sure.
And it's with respect to the civil rights and excessive force cases, and obviously very concerned with the numbers and the amount of money being paid. And my question to the city attorney is, as appropriate, determined by the city attorney's office, I think I would benefit, I'm assuming my colleagues would benefit from a briefing on the underlying facts and causes for that. And I realize some of that may involve pending litigation, it may have to be done in closed session. So as appropriate, can we put that on a future agenda so we can understand what's behind these numbers?
Yes, we can provide a briefing on those cases, and we will provide you some information that will allow you to determine which cases you'd like to be briefed on.
That would be very helpful to understand if there are more systematic issues that we have to address. So thank you.
And sorry to add, ma'am, the city attorney every year publishes a fiscal year report on their liability payouts. And in the last, we track that and we track with the department. Particularly, we've noticed citywide, not just the Los Angeles Police Department, retaliation lawsuits are trending up, and they're the biggest for us normally. Although this one shows a 0 for this quarter and 2 sexual harassment. But if you look at payouts in civil rights and excessive force cases have trended down over our last 3 years. So in our last report before you were on the board, fiscal year 2015-2016, we paid out $68 million. Fiscal year 2016-17, we paid out $30.4 million, and last year, per the city attorney's report, 2017-2018, we paid out $17.9 million. So from a 2-year difference of over 68 million to about 18 million. So they have a very comprehensive report that's released every July, and I have a copy for to maybe to start the conversation.
I'd appreciate getting that, and I realize the other members of the commission have had a benefit of that, but as a new commissioner, I'd appreciate reading that. And I appreciate the efforts the department has made with risk management, and I should acknowledge the city attorney's office too, that's very involved in this. Yet as commissioners, I think we have an independent responsibility to evaluate. I think we all can agree these numbers are high. We want to figure out ways to address them, and that's where I'm really looking for, with the understanding that the department, the city attorney's office, and the commission has done a lot over the years, but more needs to be done.
We absolutely agree. And to that point, maybe before we delve into Captain Thomas's quarterly report, I just want to, the department risk manager is Mr. Arif Alikan. He couldn't be here today, so I'm the second tier, but what is that, JV? I'm not sure how, but I just wanted to kind of lay out his vision for 2018-19 as we've discussed, 2019 rather, going into our, I think, already robust risk management plan, is that basically we are going to continue with the 4 things: messaging, training, a review of policies, procedures, and practices, infrastructure and collaboration. And when we talk about messaging, I think Captain Thomas has just done an amazing work with her team on harm reduction messaging campaign to include seatbelt usage, safe driving, even suicide prevention that our department's working with, and workplace injury. When it comes to training, you will hear us beat this drum over and over about the desire to continue the conflict resolution training with Pepperdine, but also to examine other less costly training opportunities. We are considering, we're trying to retool the command development school training that all captain candidates go to with risk management legal affairs aimed at preparing new COs for identifying and dealing with workplace conflict. So those issues that end up costing us millions of dollars, training our people who are going to be captains and division commanders how to deal with issues as they come up. And then finally developing a training session with the Legal Affairs Division and the City Attorney to meet every new commanding officer, to train them on navigating labor and employment issues, to mitigate retaliation and discrimination complaints, and make them aware of our internal department resources that we use, like the internal meeting processes. This year also, we plan on reviewing, at the direction of the chief of police, review of policies and procedures and practices related to use of force. We are doing what we can as the risk manager to help shape the new use of force policy. Currently, Mr. Alarcon co-chairs the Executive Use of Force Policy Review Committee, and we have identified all the use of force processes, working with Jennifer's shop, all the use of force projects that are in the works right now, that are stuck in meet and confer or training or in our own command, and try to get those spearheaded and done. Likewise, we're looking at the pursuits. We have worked closely with California Policy Institute of UCLA and Berkeley staff and a department-wide working group, and we are coordinating with them to understand what really triggers pursuits, what are the harms related to pursuits, and how we can basically have the best pursuit policy to keep our officers and the public safe. And then finally, we're working on infrastructure, working with the divisional risk management coordinators that Jennifer oversees to identify infrastructure needs that may most impact officer safety. And that includes whether there's a staph outbreak or a typhus outbreak or there's mold in stations. Jennifer's shop works closely with medical liaison and Cal OSHA to identify these issues and with facilities management repair them. And then finally, collaboration that I touched on. Risk management division is extremely small. There's just I think eight.
For our problem-solving unit, we actually only have one sergeant and one officer doing all the work for the entire department.
They seem like 8. I'm going to say 8. Okay. Yeah. So it's a small but mighty division, and so we've got recommitted and dedicated to collaboration, not just with the internal people in our department, the nutritionists, Office of Operations, and their seatbelt campaigns, but with the city attorney. We have a really good partner, the city attorney, Kelly Lynn Porter, as their risk manager. She's just a brilliant thinker, and we're working with them to identify risk management strategies to again focus on retaliation and all those issues that have plagued us.
So I'm just going to give a condensed version since a lot of the questions and Commander Bird's presentation already addressed some of the issues. But I'm extremely proud of all the work that really the two members of problem-solving unit have been doing this quarter and also this past year. I want to talk about the employee-involved traffic collisions. Instead of going down onto all the numbers, for the new commissioners who haven't seen this, one of the things that we did in 2018, and we continue to do so this fiscal year, is we have installed this neoprene tube called Drop Stop, which is fills up the gap between the car's the seat and also the middle console of the vehicles. And this quarter, our 2 members gone out to Office of Operation to inspect all the vehicles for first responders to make sure that is there. And if you look at this, it has Arrive Alive and also Buckle Up. And what we're really trying to do is to provide our employees a consistent and persistent message of safe driving, to wear their seatbelt, to slow down when they drive, to care about what is important now, not 5 minutes from now, so that they can get to the scene, arrive to provide outstanding services to our community. The other thing that we continue to do so is to put this sticker on the dashboard of the police vehicle so that as officers get in, I don't know if you could see it, but as officers or employees getting into their car, this is another visual reminder. Lastly, Mr. Soboroff had mentioned that we used to have the signs buckle up at the stations. We actually enlarged a similar picture of this and framed it in a poster size, and we have installed it by the kit room of every station. So as officers are actually getting their equipment, they have the first reminder to buckle up, to slow down. When they leave the station, getting it in their cars, they have another visual reminder, and lastly, this. So this is all of our attempts for employee-involved traffic collision to change the mindset, to continue to remind our employees to slow down and make the right decision when that backup call comes out, when the hot shot comes out, to slow it down a bit so that it can drive safely to the scene and prevent traffic collisions from occurring. Commander Byrd talked about our conflict resolution course, how we deal with some of our workplace conflicts. I'm really pleased to announce that we have, since the inception of this course, we have had 12 courses. It's a 4-day class for supervisors. It's a conflict resolution course where our employees, our supervisors are learning how to identify conflict, how to resolve conflict before it becomes a claim, a grievance, or a lawsuit. And we have 484 students who have attended that course. And we also sent our command officer to a two-day condensed version. And thus far, we have 130 command officers who have completed that course. Our next and last class that we have for command officers is April 15 and 16. And our last 4-day class is going to be March 4 to 7. And we have already 50 students. All the feedback that we have from that course has been outstanding. I have never been to a class where students are lining up at the end, the last day of class, to speak with me to say this is such a critical class. They wish they had this class when they make sergeants. But we're not stopping there. We've been working this quarter with the City Attorney's Office Dispute Resolution Program to say we have a class for supervisors, but we need to start earlier. And so with the City Attorney's Office, we're trying to find out if we can have a mediation training for our officers. They are offering a 4-day mediation training, and we are looking at bringing that class over to our employees here with the intent that internally, that would teach our officers the skill set to deconflict conflicts, to mediate some minor issues, but externally in the community, when we have calls that is not a crime, that is merely a dispute at a low level, our officers will have the skill set to be able to mediate some of those conflicts so that that conflict between neighbors, for example, does not become aggravated and later on becomes a crime. So we're trying to make sure that we are reaching to not just our supervisor, but our officers, and this also includes our civilian counterpart, our civilian employees.
I noticed that in, I'm looking at table 13.
Sorry.
It's page 12.
Page 12. I noticed, and again, this is a moment in time. This first quarter, this fiscal versus last fiscal. But I'm looking at things that are just outliers. Like you look at false arrest, detention, and imprisonment. The number went down by almost $3 million. And then you look at unlawful search and/or seizure, and the number went up by $3 million. And my question is twofold. Obviously, these are specific cases that trigger these things. But at what point, when you see these trends, do you look at systems, at trends? Again, here we see 1-0 for first quarter 2017, 2018 for unlawful search and seizure. But if you go back 8 quarters, has it always been 0 and now it's $3.5 million? Or how do these trigger?
So, jump in if I'm screwing it up, but I've been talking about this with Mr. Alicon. We recognize as a quarterly report, this is a
really hard.
This is a really blunt number and a very precise tool that it might not be the best place to look at it. You nailed it, sir. It is a snapshot in time, but these lawsuits are some 4, 5, 6 years old sometimes, have been, in this quarter, it's representing when they have come to fruition, when there's a payout, when there's a finding. So we have looked at it, like I reported earlier, over tracking it in fiscal years, and that's what the city attorney's office does. And I think that's a better barometer to say, what do we need to look at? So for us, certainly we're looking at the part of the conflict resolution was to deal with the retaliation lawsuits that have plagued not just the department but the entire city. That's a really strong focus point. But again, when we look at the false arrest, the use of force, the wrongful death, that number's 0. But we're going to charge forward with looking at the best way to revamp our use of force policy, because we have a chief of police who says, absolutely, I want to reduce the number of deaths and I want to reduce the number of uses of force. So I apologize. It's a chart that leads to a lot of questions, but it's a mega trend.
And anybody can interpret it their own way.
I would just say, sir, just because there's wrongful deaths, we've paid out zero. That is the absolute essential focus of our chief of police to drive down those uses of force that end in death. And so the numbers don't really indicate how hard we're working on some of these.
Got it.
And just to add to Commander Byrd, every single lawsuit that we've had, whether we pay out or we don't, Legal Affairs Division, I know, prepares a report for Commander Byrd and Mr. Alakhan to review. And in that report, what we're looking for is what are the lessons we can learn from it, so that is it a system issue? Is it a training issue? So that we may not have any impact on this right now, but what we're looking for is identify lessons learned so that we can not make that mistake or change our system to prevent something similar from occurring again.
Critical.
And that's the whole purpose of all of us working together to reduce that harm.
That's the point. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had, just real quick for the record, one, I wanted to echo the comment that in the question you just raised, Mr. President, that this is a snapshot in time, and I think it would be helpful to look for something that gives us a broader picture over whether it's going back to 15 or to some broader period of time. I also would echo the comment that was made by Commissioner Decker that it would be also, whether it's in the context of this report or in some other process, it would be helpful to have something that really speaks to the background or what's behind the data, the trends or the data that we're seeing. And then finally, and I think this the question, in the conclusion of the report makes what I, at least on the face of this, have to interpret as almost an assumption, which is that it says that, the concerted efforts of RMD and the department have yielded these significant reductions. And then you kind of call out two bullets where there's some aggregate, reductions in payouts. And the question I have is, without any further information, I'm saying that one can make a broad assumption that this variety and this collection of efforts that you described is resulting in the reductions in payouts. But it's not really clear to me, at least, what efforts we make to really look and see what do we know about what's really making a positive difference, and what are the areas where maybe you're doing have a lot of input, a lot of effort going on the front end, but may need some additional, redirecting it to some other area or some additional. So that's the question. And I don't know if it's really your function, or that's why I'm asking if it could be a different part of the department, or it could be this unit. But just how do we know really what's making a difference in all of the training and all of the efforts that you're doing, and the data that we see?
It's a complex question, and probably it's an oversimplification to make the conclusion that our efforts are doing this. I don't know if it's our efforts alone. I do know that what gets audited gets done in our department. That's been something we learned from the consent decree, and what we have focused on, what we have chosen to focus on, the harms that we're focusing on, we are seeing a difference, fiscal year over fiscal year. So by next report, the annual report is a broader report. The one we did in fiscal year at the end of July, at the end of June last year was a broader, lengthy report that delved into some of that. But I can prepare a more thorough report to discuss the lawsuits and what we think our impacts are specifically to those areas.
Okay, that'd be
that
helpful.
Would come out of my shop, and it's squarely on my shoulders to complete.
That would be helpful. I think we will also have some opportunity to consider and reflect as well as to, because I'm not really sure, as I sit here today, as kind of still somewhat relatively new, whether it's really most appropriate to bring forward in the context that you're offering, or whether it's some other review that may be helpful. But I'm just, when you look at things like the officer-involved shootings and those things, and why was there 2 in one year and 4 in the other, I don't really know that we can say here, what's behind something of that, that nature, which is going to be have a lot of nuance to it. So I'll leave it there, but just note that it will be helpful, I think, to add a little context, some dimension to the data, and then we can talk as the commission about how we can figure out really where we know we can draw that line between your efforts and the outcomes that are being reported.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any public comments on this item?
Yes, sir, we have 3 cards. We have Michael Novick, Melina Abdullah, and the Red Chief Hunt.
Mr. Novick?
Yeah, I think it's significant that the risk management and harm reduction report focuses almost entirely on the department and its officers and not on the community. So I think that that's a problem with the report. The last item in it is the payouts, and again, you can't name trends, but the payout for the first quarter was $1.5 million more than for the previous first quarter, so that's problematic. I think that if you want to reduce risk, the national figures for officers who died in the line of duty for last year show that I think more than a third were traffic accidents and collisions, and so I think that that's very serious. I think that last year we talked about the fact that the rates of suicide are higher among police officers and other professions, spousal abuse and other forms of self-destructive behavior, and I think that needs to be dealt with. I think that you do need to reduce the harms and the risk to the community. I think 2 ways you could do that have to do with insurance, which is the way a lot of other enterprises deal with it. If you had heavier insurance on your officers for driving, they spend a lot of time in their cars, they drive under riskier conditions, they have long shifts, I think they should be required to have more insurance. And I think that if law enforcement officers were forced to carry a kind of liability and malpractice insurance, anybody else who has power of life and death, medical professionals are required to carry malpractice insurance if people die, on the operating table. I think if officers were required to have such insurance, it would prevent them from carrying out some of the executions we've seen in the streets of this city.
Melina Abdullah.
Morning.
So first, can you all do a better job of numbering your agendas? Because 2 has been missing from the agenda for the last 4 meetings. So it just goes
I will
straight
make sure to do
into
that.
A. Oh, thank you. I didn't realize that was you. But if we could make sure that the numbers are on there, that would be great. 2 things. One, I think it's really important that we look at how the department and the city has resisted the lawsuit. So I'm wondering if the driving down of the payouts has anything to do with the fact that LAPD continuously denies any liability in the murder of our people. And I'm thinking particularly about Kenny Watkins, who was murdered by LAPD, and yet his family, 18 years old, yet his family received nothing. And so it could be not related to any improvement in the department. It could just be related to you all fighting more vigorously against the people of the community. And so I think it's really important that we look at that. Secondly, with regard to officers dying because they're driving too fast and not wearing their seatbelts, maybe you treat officers like you treat everybody else. If they're breaking the speed limit or not wearing their seatbelts, I'd love to just get a dashboard sticker. But what do I get? If I don't wear my seatbelt or if I drive too fast, I get a ticket. Maybe cops need to get tickets for breaking the law too.
Next speaker, please.
The Red Chief Hunt.
Mr. Hunt. Good morning, sir.
Good morning and Happy New Year, you guys. The Red Chief Hunt. I want to talk about a little bit about the lawsuits and fighting them for the city. The city lose 99.9% of their lawsuits if the people fight back. It's a sad when you have to go out and hire outside counsel to fight your lawsuits and things like that. It could be received as that the city of Los Angeles have 500 city attorneys, none of them know what they're doing. Number 2 is, I'm with the rest of them. The police officers should follow the law. I mean, if they're in their cars driving fast and they're on code 2, code 3, whatever they do, they should have their safety belts on. There shouldn't be any liabilities like that. And sometimes I think the best police high-speed chase I seen was when Matt Johnson was president, and this little car was doing donuts in the middle of the thing, and they let them turn themselves in. And a lot of times that we get into a rush to stop these guys, and we still got the helicopter above, and they're still not getting away. Sometimes it's best to let them stop themselves.
Thank you, sir.
And we have no other comment cards on this item?
We have a motion for approval of this item, which is number 2B. All in favor? Aye. Okay, we'll go to a report of the chief.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Farkos?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner, and good morning to everyone, and Happy New Year. I'll start first with the holiday celebrations over New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. We had a very visible and strong presence in the city, and really a relatively safe period in the city throughout the holidays. I had the opportunity to visit a number of roll calls and thank our men and women, for protecting this city. I also attended the roll call and subsequent deployment to Graham Park, where we had about 50,000 visitors, attendees celebrating in Graham Park, and really a great collaborative effort with the Sheriff's Department and LAPD, again, to ensure a very safe environment for everyone to enjoy and ring in the new year. Also during this period, we regretfully learned of the passing of Ms. Roberta Weintraub. As you know, was a instrumental and architect in helping assimilate our police magnet programs and POP programs. Under the direction and coordination of Chief Grimala, we coordinated a celebration of life at the Elysian Park Academy, where we had command staff attend, over 100 cadets and 50 students from the magnet school and POP program, as again, just a remembrance of all of her contributions to the Los Angeles Police Department. And the last thing on the significant events, as your opening comments, Commissioner Soboroff, we're working closely with the UTLA and with LAUSD on any preparations for a strike. The department is coordinating our resources to support in the event that a strike does occur. Again, working closely with all of our partners within the city in coordination for the plans. During the recess, we've had 3 categorical occurrences over this period. First, I'll start off in Central area, an in-custody death. On December 19th at 9:25 hours, Central Patrol Division officers responded to a battery call at 5th and Flower. A male individual later identified as Husi Outing was physically assaulting a construction worker. That construction worker was aided by a number of citizens who came to assist in restraining Mr. Outing. When the officers arrived, Outing was being controlled in a prone position on the ground. He resisted officers as they attempted to take him into custody, resulting in a use of miscellaneous physical force. A rescue ambulance was requested. Once inside the RA, Outing began to exhibit signs of medical distress and was transported to Good Samaritan Hospital, where he failed to respond to emergency life-saving measures and was pronounced dead at the hospital. FID detectives responded to the scene and handling the administrative and criminal investigations associated with this incident. On December 22nd in West Valley, we had an officer-involved shooting with hits. It was at 21:20 hours, and West Valley Patrol responded to a radio call of a 415 man in the area of Weddington and Shoshone. When officers observed the suspect, later identified as Stephen Michael Benavides, unsheathing a large knife and confronting a citizen. The officers stopped their vehicle, attempted to take enforcement action, but Benavides ran. In a foot pursuit ensued. During the foot pursuit, Benavides produced and pointed a gun at officers, resulting in an officer-involved shooting. Benavides was struck but continued to run. A perimeter was established. Benavides was later taken into custody after a non-categorical use of force. He was treated by the Los Angeles Fire Department and transported to Northridge Hospital, where he underwent surgery, and he remains at Northridge Hospital in stable condition. A Daisy pellet gun and a large knife were recovered from the scene, and Forest Investigation Division is handling the investigation. On December 31st at 0440 hours in Van Nuys area, an officer-involved shooting with hits occurred. Officers responded to a screaming woman at 13610 Van Owen Street. Officers arrived, knocked on the door, heard noises within the apartment, requested additional resources. Before the arrival of additional officers, the suspect, identified as Ronnie Badas Mendez, opened the door, apartment armed with a knife. Patas Mendez, still armed with a knife, moved quickly toward one of the officers, which resulted in an officer-involved shooting. Patas Mendez was struck by gunfire and a rescue ambulance was requested. Patas Mendez was treated by the fire department and was pronounced deceased at scene. A large knife, approximately 9 inches, was recovered from the scene, and Force Investigation Division is handling this investigation. For the year-end stats regarding officer-involved shootings, Commissioners, as of December 31st, year-to-date 33 for 2018 versus 46 for 2017, which is a 28.3% reduction in officer-involved shootings. For the end-of-the-year crime report, that is still ongoing with CompStat Unit in preparation for the chief and the mayor's press conference. I think I'm going to defer and allow the chief to present on the year-end crime stats. Okay. Personnel numbers for sworn and civilian, 10,040 for sworn personnel. Civilian personnel on the payroll is 3,003. Reserve officers is 387. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions of the chief? The public comments, please.
Yes, we have 6 comment cards. We have Michael Novick, followed by Adam Smith and Paula Miner.
Yeah, the report didn't specify how many fatalities there were, including deaths in custody, and I'm curious about that. I know that the last report that Chief Moore gave, the percentage of fatalities among the shootings was higher, even though the number of shootings was lower. And I'm wondering if that still holds. And I think that, again, you need to look at the pattern and practice that these things are involved in. I think it's good that there were only 33 shootings, but if more of them are fatal, you're not solving the problem.
Next speaker,
Adam Smith.
Mr. Smith.
Chief, are you sticking around for general comment? Thanks. A few things. You brought up the Grand Park celebration for New Year's, which is all well and good, but I think it should be noted that at Garcetti's behest, the LAPD removed unhoused people from First Street across the street here to make room for revelers for New Year's. And so when we talk about these, supposed celebrations, we should talk about the dirty work that the LAPD is doing to make it okay for the people that are allowed to go to them. Amplifying and echoing what Michael just said, you said shootings were down 28.3%, but that doesn't speak to the fatalities. And what the numbers show is that the LAPD is getting, their aim's getting better. The killings aren't going down. The amount of shootings are going down, but the number of killings aren't going down. Which brings me to my last point. There was recently a study in Dallas with the Dallas Police Department that showed officers with a military veteran history are 3 times more likely to have used their weapons in the course of duty. So I'm wondering if Chief Moore, who's looking to strengthen relationships with diverse communities across the city and overall lessen the use of categorical and non-categorical uses of force, I wonder if it's if he really believes that, if his office or the Office of Inspector General would be willing to look into the correlations between military service and why the LAPD continues to lead the country in the number of fatal officer-involved shootings.
Next speaker.
Paula Miner, followed by T. Guerra, Melina Abdullah, and the Red Chief Hunt.
Morning.
Good morning. I'm sorry Chief Moore is not here, but I want to speak on the LAPD murder of Albert Ramon Dorsey. Although this occurred November 29th, it has been the topic of a lot of LAPD PR during the month of December, since we've had an opportunity to talk to the chief about it. Mr. Dorsey was murdered at the Hollywood 24-hour fitness on Sunset. There was a meeting in the black community, and there have been the release of 2 videos by LAPD related to this particular murder. First of all, regarding the meeting, it appears that Chief Moore is going to meetings telling kind of different stories to different segments of the community and presenting different levels of information than what he presents here at this commission. This, to me, is an attempt to cover up and to hide from the community certain elements of what happened with that particular murder. Also, with regard to the two videos, there is the overproduced video that was released after a commission meeting where we could have spoken about it in December. In that particular video, which was narrated by Josh Rubenstein in a very condescending way, as if it were an LAPD commercial, the only thing that comes out of that video is one, that the individual murdered was naked, totally naked in the locker room, and that the video cams of the two police officers failed during that particular incident. So what happens is there's only an audio of the murder, but somehow these state-of-the-art equipment that we get as a result of Mr. Soboroff's connections with these companies does not work in sensitive situations. And I also like to point out that after that video, another video was released of a confrontation with the security guard, which had nothing to do with what happened the next day.
Thank you. Next speaker.
T. Guerra.
So he's not here today, but we've already heard Michael Moore's comments about violent crime in the city being down this year. And I just want to acknowledge that when folks in LA are dying on the street from being unhoused and from not receiving medical attention and from not having access to clean air, land, affordable food, and other critical services, that those are homicides. And that this is violence committed by this city. We can view this no other way. And we must acknowledge that that form of violence of allowing people to die from lack of housing when the city has enough funds to cover everyone disproportionately impacts black folks and trans folks and queer folks and people who are disabled and black femmes and women. So in any conversation about crime rates and about violent crime taking place in this city, we have to acknowledge the violence that is inflicted by the state and that targets non-white Angelenos. And it's facilitated by the folks in this room that consistently fund policing over people. And regarding Michael Moore's assessment in the LA Times about why crime rates are down, there are two claims I'd like to address. The first is that LAPD strategies contributed to the slight decline in violent crime recorded by LAPD citywide. But what criminologists everywhere will tell you is that you all have no idea to what extent, and he doesn't have any idea to what extent, LAPD strategies actually impacted the crime rate. And that's because far bigger forces than the LAPD are what actually shape and impact rates of crime and reported crime. In fact, one of the teams that Moore gives credit to, the Gang Reduction and Youth Development Program, themselves notes in their own 2017 evaluation report that trend reversal in overall violent crime is driven by large-scale social and economic processes beyond the control of GRYD intervention response. But apparently Moore has no idea of this in his conversations to the media. Another claim he makes is the decline due to data-driven programs. So let's be clear that LAPD's data-driven programs have never been independently assessed, and that the only claims of success directly from research.
Thank you. Is there another speaker?
Melina Abdullah.
I want to echo what both Adam and Michael said about the numbers. So the OIS numbers are important, but more important are the OIS that results in death. And so if you have that data, can you please share it with us? Do you have it now? Can you tell us that number?
So on the year-end fatalities are 12 for 2018 versus 17 for 2017 for a 29.4% reduction.
12 versus 17.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you for that. Also, I think it's important, one, we want to lift up until it's zero, we haven't won anything, right? Until nobody is killed by police, we haven't won anything. We're not done, right? I think it's also important that we lift up Albert Ramon Dorsey, and I want to echo what Ms. Minor said about Albert Ramon Dorsey. The last time you all had a police commission meeting, I read a statement from their family. They still have not received his belongings, including his computer that has all of his music on it. And it's really important that they have that. You all claim to have a family liaison that's doing work with the families. The families claim that or say that the liaison has not been helpful, and they're really getting more information from us than they are from your department, which killed him. There's also a request that you all say, and I lost some of my time with him reporting back. It's also important that when we ask questions about officer-involved killings of our people, you all always say it's under investigation. But then you commence with these PR campaigns that seek to tell us what happened to our people, right? So you painted Albert Ramon Dorsey as someone who just came into 24-hour fitness to use the shower and was a problem. But the truth is he was a member of 24-hour fitness. You all show a blurry video and say, see, he's violent, even though it had nothing to do with that incident, right? So you're on this PR campaign, but you won't give us information. And finally, we want to say there's no more pitting good Negroes against so-called bad Negroes. Your attempts to assemble pastors and other people who you think are going to go along with LAPD, that's done. We are really involved in the work and connected with the families, and we're not going to allow you to cut us out of meetings in order to do PR stumps in black communities anymore.
Thank you. Next.
The Red Chief Hunt.
Can someone follow up on the request for the
Yeah, sure.
property?
Good day again. I just want to thank the community for holding LAPD accountable and transparency. And I hope you guys keep on doing that, because I think every individual in here has a commitment to that. Everybody counts was my statement last year, and everybody counts this year. Thank you guys for holding LAPD accountable. Thank you.
Okay, we have no other comment cards on item number 3. We're now on item number 4, public comment period. We have 9 comment cards. We begin with Michael Novick, T. Guerra, and Audrey George.
Yeah, I want to second what T. Guerra said earlier. LA Times reported that 1,200 people, 1,200 unhoused people died on the streets of this city last year. That's practically 4 people a day. Those are crimes, and they're not reported by the LAPD as such and not dealt with as part of the violence that this city inflicts on its own population. I want to emphasize again that week after week we've requested that not the police chief hold community meetings to try to massage the public, but that the LA Police Commission hold its meetings in the community in the evening outside of the police administration building so that the community at large can attend and that the people in the community can talk to each other as well as to you. I think it's reprehensible that you've never done so. And I think that in general, I want to emphasize that we need, if we can't have authentic civilian, or I don't want to say civilian, I want to say community control of the police, because I don't like the terminology of civilian. Civilian reflects the fact that the police are a paramilitary organization, and I reject that kind of policing. But if we can't have community control of the police, then we need to abolish the police entirely.
So I'm going to talk now about LAPD's data-driven programs, and specifically a comment that you made, Shane Goldsmith, to folks in the room at the last meeting. When we criticized the type of surveillance and tracking and stalking and harassment of Angelenos that occurs in the name of these programs, you laughed and said, only abolition will satisfy you. First, to laugh at the concept of abolition is the height of ignorance and demonstrates a lack of understanding of history. But besides that, let me say to all of you that you don't have to be an abolitionist to see that these programs are illegitimate and that they cause harm to communities that are already under-resourced and that have historically been harmed the most, and that they seek to profit from the implementation and expansion of predictive policing. PredPol targets historically highly policed neighborhoods and allows officers themselves to choose which hotspots to visit, but they claim their programs are unbiased. Operation Laser 2 has only been evaluated by the same group that implements the program and that profits from it. Further, looking back at the initial results where Laser was implemented in Newton, the very first pilot program, the drop in reported homicides did not last, was never replicated in any other division, and could not be tied to the program. Every expansion of the program after that in 2015 and then again in 2016 resulted in wildly different and inconclusive results. Even the researchers themselves, Justice Security Strategies, the best they could come up with in their reports was Laser may be responsible for tangible gains. Further, while results are not statistically significant, they may become significant when additional observations are available, and that is a phenomenon that researchers refer to in predictive policing as the time problem, and that is the idea that if you predict something will happen and then you wait long enough, eventually it will happen. They also call that predicting the obvious. These programs have never demonstrated success, and they criminalize and traumatize communities. You don't have to be an abolitionist to recognize that or to disagree with them. Auditing and monitoring these programs is not enough. They should never have been implemented in.
Audrey George, followed by Adam Smith and Paula Miner.
Any 8-year-old knows that when you get into a car, you buckle in. And just in case any adult or child forgets, our cars beep and remind us. We are allowing people who don't have that much common sense as an 8-year-old to have guns and go out into our community and try to de-escalate and find crime and cause harm in those communities. People that don't have the sense to drive carefully and buckle in. On another note, as Steve Soborov had mentioned, going off topic, I believe, about the school district's dispute with UTLA, one thing I just want to mention, one thing nobody seems to dispute is that our new superintendent, not so new, is a billionaire who has no background in education and just brings people in whose main area of expertise is dismantling public education institutions. We know that our superintendent intends for us in the future not to have public schools, that's something that he sees as part of our past. It doesn't surprise me at all to see Steve Soborov aligning himself with Buettner.
Listen, I didn't align myself. What I said was, whatever either side believes, both sides are hurting the children. I'm not on one side or the other, and to say that I'm on one side or the other comes from no understanding and no central place. I want to be clear. I'm concerned about the children. I'm not concerned about the union, and I'm not concerned about the district. Period. To say I am is wrong, and you don't do it. Go ahead. Mr. Smith?
I just want to go back to item M, with your permission, Grace. Chief Arcos offered, only when asked by this commission, the most vague description of what the $10,000 donation from the Police Foundation is going to be used for. Shouldn't this most basic, vague amount of info be included in the report attached to the consent items? At least the ones purporting to be about the chief strengthening partnerships with quote-unquote diverse neighborhoods and communities. I want to bring something up that I've brought up before, these illegally installed planter boxes in Venice. There's about 150 of them that we've counted in the last few weeks. Is someone from the Chief of Staff's office here, Chief Arcos? Because Sergeant Sapp, who's usually here, was the one that confirmed with me that all of these planter boxes are illegal. The city attorney's office has confirmed that they're all misdemeanors, that they're being installed, but Sergeant Sapp told me after that they were all installed illegally, that the best way to get rid of them is to file 311 requests with the city. A group of us have now made several hundred of these 311 requests, and now They've all been closed, which we knew was going to happen. Nothing's been removed. And now they're saying to ask CD11, to ask Bonin's office about this. And I've been told by the chief's office and by Sergeant Sapp that this isn't a police issue. But if it's a crime to install things illegally on the sidewalk, which the city attorney says it's a misdemeanor, how is it not a fucking police issue? Lastly, these meetings can be incredibly frustrating for me. I can only imagine how much more frustrating they would be if my children looked like the children that are routinely harassed, surveilled, and criminalized by this department. And I'm not trying to get kicked out, but it's very telling that I've gotten 3 fucking warnings today. And
Thanks.
The next 3 speakers, please. Paula Miner, Jacqueline Richardson, and Melina Abdullah.
You've only got 1 warning.
Look at the tape.
Mr. Smith?
Okay.
Go ahead. No more games.
My comment just is on the, I think it was item M, where information is supposed to come back at a later date to answer Mr. Bonner's questions about that particular item. I would like to ask that they also include an explanation to Mr. Bonner about what the LA Police Foundation is, because many of the questions about the donations arise from that. And how it utilizes those donations. Secondly, I want to talk again about Albert Ramon Dorsey because I did not, the murder of Albert Ramon Dorsey, because I did not have enough time during my previous time. I'm particularly concerned about the fact that LAPD released the video of an altercation, a conversation, or whatever you want to call it, between Mr. Dorsey and 24-Hour Fitness security guard. I have a question about how they think that relates to what happened the next day. Is the implication to the public that what happened 24 hours previously was the cause of LAPD officers murdering Mr. Dorsey the next day? That particular video, there's very little audio, there's no explanation. I think that's a poor use of public relations and a poor use of this so-called now extremely sophisticated video process that LAPD has been releasing in the last year. So I think that's just another effort to what is the best word, to make the public not really understand what really happened, because what happened the day before should not have any bearing on what officers did the next day. So I want us to remember that we're going to be talking about Albert Ramon Dorsey for a number of months, and this is a very, very critical issue.
Jacqueline Richardson, please.
Money may be the motivation of some of these people getting killed and drive-by shootings and house murders or whatever else you have. I say that because some black people and others are being murdered, and their driver's licenses, their social security numbers, and other identification may be sold. If they're murdered in Los Angeles, they may be circulated or recycled in the city of New York. For instance, after all the insurance papers are taken care of and benefits are given from Social Security, then they could safely recycle those IDs. For instance, the Internal Revenue between 5 and 7 years ago reported on to one of those television channels that they had refund checks for 5 to 20 people, and they didn't know what numbers, what belonged to what people, because apparently they had different addresses and different occupations. So that shows that that could have been involved in that situation. And also, the major television channels in Los Angeles reported that the County Board of Supervisors had not deleted over 300 or so many people that have been dead for about 8 to 20 years. They were still voting in every election, county, federal, and state elections, and they've been doing that for they've been dead between 8 and 20 years, and they're still voting in every election. That was just for Los Angeles County. They didn't mention other counties that had the same recycling of information. So that goes to show it may be money related when people are murdered, and it may be money related.
Melina Abdullah, followed by Terry Akins and the Red Chief Hunt.
So I wasn't in the room when you spoke about the teachers' strike, but I don't know what that has to do with your position on this commission. As a mother of 3 LAUSD children, I can say that the strike is necessary. Your comrade, Austin Butner, is proposing to put 52 children in a class. I don't want my children shoved into a classroom with 51 other children. And so it's important that I don't believe you sent any of your children to public school. So it's important that you hear from parents and teachers and students before you open your mouth and say what the teachers
You're
strike
right about
will do.
one thing, and that was you weren't here when I talked, so you don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, you're in my time now, Steve.
Right, so I'll give you extra. In fact, I'll give you double extra time.
Thank you. And so I think it's important. I have comrades and friends who record what you say, so I know what you said. And so as a parent of LAUSD children, I am telling you what my perspective is, something that you can't speak to. And so the second thing that I want to talk about is Senate Bill 1421. You used the term transparency. This was the police transparency bill. This was our right to know bill. It's shameful that LAPD is trying to get out of releasing the records that we won through a legislative process. It's shameful that you're trying to bury those records from families who the legislature affirms have a right to know what happened to their children. It's shameful that rather than willingly opening up those records, you're trying to engage in this PR work where, you know, we're sold this bill of goods that these body cams are about transparency, but instead they're used for your PR. If you want to be transparent and cooperate with the new legislation.
Next.
Terry Akins.
Hi. Speaking of PR, I'm never going to stop really arguing my case with your PR department. The FBI really knows everything that I do, okay? I yell at them on a regular basis. And they have asked me to sue LAPD for your part. However, you guys were ordered to do what you did to me by the big kahuna, which was President Obama, and at that time, Michelle, and of course, my rotten ex-husband and my sister. So, you know, it's going to be the way it is. I do not blame LAPD because, again, you had your orders, okay? And you had certain information on me, which is completely wrong, but you had it. So I'm not going to be suing LAPD. I am not a Stepford wife and do not need conditioning. So just to let you know, I'm still going to be me, and I'm still going to argue with the same people that do your media and that I've known for forever. And, you know, that includes, as you know, Oprah and Michelle Obama, because they were all in the same mix. And, you know, there's nothing I can do about it, but I will be writing the FBI about everything that I've done and sending out all of my press releases. And, you know, like I said, there's nothing that I'm doing that the FBI doesn't know about. I'm not breaking any laws. I don't intend to break any laws. But again, I'm not a Stepford wife. You don't need to condition me. And I don't want to wind up like the 1,269 homeless people dead on the street, okay? Nobody's interfering with me since I've come here, and I'm glad I came. So I'm leaving now.
The Red Chief Hunt, please. Zach Sherwin, followed by Stephen.
I just want to comment on the decorum of these meetings. President Soboroff, barking at community members like that is, as they say, a bad look. That's not okay to do that. You know, to become so overcome with rage when you're addressing Ms. George that you choke on your own saliva and need to swallow before you continue ranting at her after her comment. It's just unacceptable. I wish that these meetings were held in the evening in the community so that more people could see that kind of behavior from the leader of this commission, which is supposed to serve as this link between the community and LAPD. What is it like for the other commissioners, I wonder, even if you aren't looking at me, to see your leader flying off the handle like that? Like, do you think that's okay? Is it something that you're going to speak with him about in closed session after this? Like, what goes on when you're part of a meeting when that's part of it? What does it feel like for you to watch it? I can tell you what it looks like for me as a person who's sitting out in the house and didn't plan to speak today. But man, when you have people who continue to talk past their allotted 2 minutes up here who are making comments from there, perhaps you will have more sympathy now as someone who felt compelled to speak in a way that's not the way that it goes. And I'll close by pointing out the dynamic that you are a man sitting at a dais barking at two women who came up to speak. And I wonder if you will yell at me once I conclude my remarks in a moment the way that you did the two people who spoke earlier.
Next speaker, Stephen.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this morning. My name is Stephen Box. I'm a mobility advocate here in the city of Los Angeles, and I'm here to address our right to travel safely and free of fear. We think it's one of our fundamental and basic rights. And I think that one of our greatest public safety opportunities is to address the violence on our streets, traffic violence, and the fact that it's a tremendously dangerous place for our most vulnerable. And so we have significant opportunities to work together. The police are always involved in every transportation and engineering project and proposal. Enforcement is always one of the elements when the projects are evaluated. 10 years ago, we had something called the Cyclists LAPD Task Force. It met monthly here. And it started meeting semi-monthly, and eventually it just dissipated into the wind. And I'd like to ask for your support in reinstating the Cyclists LAPD Task Force, where advocates from around the city work together with the LAPD to address the issues that are specific to our streets and how we can make them safer and work for everybody, all modes of transportation. Motorists, cyclists, mass transit users, those in wheelchairs, our most vulnerable, our children, and folks like me who aren't as mobile as they once were, but still need to cross the street. So my specific request is that you join me in pushing forward with the reinstatement of the Cyclists LAPD Task Force. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Thank you very much.
We have no other comment cards. The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item numbers 5A1, 5A2, and 5B in accordance to Government Code 54957.
because you weren't there, everything was 2-2, so we're all screwed.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, I find that hard to believe.
The Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. In closed session, item number 5A1 was discussed and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. In closed session, item number 5A2 was discussed and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. And in closed session, item number 5B was discussed. Mr. President, is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you.